Get started. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our town hall on commitment to change through action. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Maryland DC Credit Union Association and also AACUC. I'm John Bratsakis, president of the association. Would like to also thank all of our panelists that are here. You'll be meeting all of them shortly. And I do want to say a special thank you to AACUC, Renee Satterwhite from the president and CEO, Adrian Johnson, who is the chairman of AACUC and also the EVP and CFO at MICU Credit Union here in Baltimore. So we have a lot to talk about. This is another in our series of webinars that we've been doing since March, and we were able to work with AACUC and reached out to Renee and Adrian to focus on this topic. And they were very gracious in making it happen with everything else that is going on and all of the demands on everybody's time. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. I'm going to turn this over to Adrian, who the chairman of AACUC, and he's going to be leading our first panel. So Adrian?
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being on the call this morning. Just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. Here we are. The end of another month, the end of another quarter, halfway through the year is gone. So before we get started, I just really want to thank John for letting us, AACUC and the panelists and all the representatives today, giving us a platform this morning. As I mentioned, of course, my name is Adrian Johnson, as John mentioned, and I'll be your host for the next hour. And we'll be discussing, this particular panel will be discussing racism. We're certainly in a safe space this morning, and so we're open for open and honest conversation and dialogue. And so that's what I consider real talk about this issue. Now, some of you already know me, but some of you don't. And I am a Black man, and I lived most of my life in Baltimore City. I've been in the financial services industry for almost 42 years and have been with MICU almost 23 years come mid-July. So I'm a recovering banker, I guess you'd say. I've been senior vice president CFO for the last decade, and I currently reside in Southern Pennsylvania. And I'd be remiss if I don't say this, my beautiful, lovely wife. Just like everyone else, I want to live and pursue the American dream. I have to admit, I consider myself very fortunate. However, when we talk about this real talk, it hasn't been a straight line to the C-suite. It's been a long and winding road, certainly with hurdles. I'm here to tell you today, Black lives do matter. Some of you thinking, well, geez, all lives matter. Well, that's true. But the fact is, Black lives matter too. And so when we talk about the spending power of Black people in America, we're talking about $1.3 trillion per year. In my mind, that deserves a lot of dignity and respect. If we talk about Blacks and you add on other people of color, other minority groups, we're talking about over $3 trillion of spending power in the US. Certainly since mid-March, we have seen the destruction of COVID. And of course, in late May, we saw the death of George Floyd. 8 minutes and 46 seconds, a policeman had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck. So that has spurred a revolution where people across the world has come together to fight and combat racism and police brutality. People across the world are saying this is no longer acceptable, period. So it certainly feels different. And as Renee Satterwhite would say, this is the tipping point. So America, think about this. America is the richest country in the world. But for some folks, the access to healthcare, education, capital, it eludes them. And so certainly we're talking about people of color and Black people in this case. So let's get to our panelists, get this thing started. Before you start, John, I do want to pull up the slide we have on racism, just so we'll know what we're talking about here. We're all on the same page. Okay, so when we talk about racism, we're talking about prejudice, discrimination, antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. All the barriers that prevent people from having equal access to the American dream, wealth, power, and legacy. So let's get to our panelists. This morning, I have the distinguished pleasure, we're going to have Renee Sadie-White. She's the president and CEO of African American Credit Union Coalition. Have Samira Salem, senior policy analyst with CUNA. Have Jill Nowacki, president and CEO of Humanity. And then I have Andre Lucas. He's the director in compliance of the Maryland DC Credit Union Association, but he's also a board member for the Eastern Regional Chapter. So I want to get started with Samira's presentation. And so if we could pull that up, I'll turn it over to Samira.
Morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here. And Adrian, if you can let me know whether y'all can see that.
I can see it. We can
Awesome. See it. Great. Thank you so much to MDDC Credit Union Association, as well as AACUC for the opportunity to be here with you all today for this very important conversation. I pulled together, I'm a researcher, so when I was asked to participate in this conversation, the first thing my head went to was data. So I've got some data here to share with you, and I want to start off though with this quote. I think it kind of frames this well. You can't have a solution until you start dealing with the problem. What you reveal, you heal. So what you reveal, you heal, right? So I wanted to start off with a little history, right? A little history with a legacy that impacts life choices for people today. So I'm sure a lot of us know about redlining. Federal Housing Administration established it in the mid-1930s as part of the New Deal. And it was really created to ensure that ensure mortgages for lower income Americans. This helped them get financing through banks. During this time, the federal government created what you see here, these color-coded maps. Areas where Black people lived received the red color. These were deemed hazardous, meaning that they were too risky to insure mortgages. What happens when you can't get mortgages? When you can't get mortgages, you know, people aren't able to buy into that area. You know, your home doesn't appreciate. These areas ultimately experience disinvestment, eventually a blight rather. So Black people were not able to accumulate wealth. They weren't able to send their kids to college with their home equity, bequeath wealth. This was the practice of redlining, really systematic policy of mortgage discrimination, right? So on the other hand, the areas that were blue and green, these were desirable areas. These were areas where white people lived. They were able to get mortgages. They were able to buy homes under very generous terms rather. There was no risk to banks because these loans were backed by the full faith and credit of the federal government. Home values appreciated. They were able to use their home equity to send their kids to college, then bequeath the assets to their heirs who lived in areas where more people went to college. They had vertical professional networks that they could benefit from. by systematically refusing to insure mortgages in and around Black neighborhoods. The Federal Housing Administration's policies were discriminatory, and they supported segregation. These policies and practices, while no longer legal, they have a legacy. They influence patterns of home ownership, urban settlement, investment, disinvestment, inheritance opportunities for people today. And you can connect the disproportionate levels of poverty, of poor health, incarceration in Black and brown communities to these policies from back in the 1930s and moving on for decades post that. So I have the maps here of Baltimore and Minneapolis. You know, to point out that to this day, East and West Baltimore, which were red line neighborhoods, right, still are impoverished neighborhoods. The neighborhood in Baltimore where Freddie Gray was murdered by the police in 2015 is a poor neighborhood, blighted, characterized by high levels of poverty. And this is, in fact, connected to the discriminatory loan policies that were set in motion in 1939. Floyd George was murdered blocks away from what was a redlined neighborhood in Minneapolis. So the existence of housing discrimination doesn't simply take place within the context of inequality. It's one of the main generators, okay? Headline from earlier this month, Washington Post. So I want to take a look at some of this racial economic inequality data. And when we're looking at it, think about the links between discriminatory housing policy, its effects on home ownership rates, the racial wealth gap, vulnerability, poverty, safety, incarceration, unemployment gaps, quality of employment, and its toll on physical and mental health. Okay, so home ownership rates in the US. Why is this important? Well, housing makes up 2/3 of all wealth of the typical US household, right? So you can look at those disparities. It's been more than 50 years since the 1968 Fair Housing Act was signed. Still, home ownership rates for Black and brown folks have lagged behind. At the height of the housing bubble, it reached nearly 50% for Hispanic, Latinx, and for Blacks. It's now fallen to 44% for Blacks, 49% for Hispanic, Latinx. And in fact, in 1970, it was 42% for Blacks. So we're just slightly above that. Home ownership rates for Hispanic, Latinx, again, 49%, but you compare it to white families where 74% own homes, right? Again, this is sort of the majority of all wealth in the US is connected to this, right? When you see disparities in wealth, like I just showed you, it's not surprising to see this wealth gap showing up, right? So a typical white household's wealth is 10 times that of a Black household. You can see it right here. This is the latest data from the Survey of Consumer Finance. It's a little bit dated. We should be getting some newer data, but nevertheless, no matter how you slice it or dice it, these numbers hold. There's a huge gap there, and it's about 8 times for a typical Hispanic Latinx household, right? Now, unemployment rates have been skyrocketing recently. So these are numbers from this year, February through May, excuse me. And excuse me. What we see here is that unemployment rate for Black and Hispanic Latinx are the highest. If you look at the jump between, so the Black African American is the gray bar, the Hispanic Latinx is that kind of teal bar. Sorry, the colors are very close. But if you look from February to March to April and May, the jumps in the Black and Hispanic Latinx unemployment rates and how they've disproportionately increased. This is because they're more likely to work in service sector, low wage jobs. these are jobs that were hit really hard due to the pandemic. So while everybody's unemployment went up, those that could least afford to lose their jobs lost their jobs, right? And there's some research out of Columbia University that projects that high unemployment levels, these high unemployment levels that we're seeing as a result of COVID, will widen racial disparities, right, when it comes to poverty. So the researchers are projecting that poverty may rise twice as much among Blacks as among whites. And then finally, there's some survey data. And there have been a number of surveys. I kind of like this Pew Research Center survey that looked at income loss due to COVID. They asked people whether they've had to take a pay cut or they've lost a job or both because of COVID. And you can see that Black and Hispanic households have been hit the worst. Those are the two bars on the right-hand side, right? Also low-income households as well. So finally, you know, we know that Economic Policy Institute, I think, put it really, really well. Black workers face two of the most lethal pre-existing conditions for coronavirus. And you know, that is racism and economic inequality, right? So you can see it here. Black and Hispanic Latinx are dying at disproportionately high rates from COVID-19. And, you know, this is all very much connected, you know, and there is a legacy from some of these policies, and racism and structural racism plays into this. And it's not just about, you know, economic impact. But these impacts are much broader and they affect the health and well-being of our communities. And so I wanted to leave you with that, but with this, if I have maybe 30 more seconds, Adrian, I know I'm kind of pushing it here time-wise, but this is some of what's giving me hope these days. This quote, so historically pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their worlds anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging our carcasses of our prejudice and hatred and avarice, our databanks and our dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us, or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So I will leave you with that.
Wow. Thank you, Samira, and certainly a lot of good data. I've seen your I've been on panels with you before, and also I've seen your presentations, and every time I see them, I learn something even more, and it is eye-opening, and so certainly I do appreciate you being on the panel today. And so just want to get to the first question, and all the panelists don't have to answer. I have really two basic questions. And the first question talks about just kind of experiences when we talk about this systematic or systemic racism or racial injustice or racial discrimination. And then the second question really, you know, what are the solutions? We know what the problem is. What can the solutions be? What are the possible solutions, and what would you like to see? And so I want to open it up. I'm a guy who kind of sticks to the fact, and being an African-American guy, Black man, I want to see what Andre Lucas, want to talk about your experiences as a Black man in this area. Andre?
Well, thank you, Adrian, and hello to everybody. When you put that question out there, I sit back and I think about, what I've seen, what I've experienced, and it's more so for me what I've experienced. And just to give you any type of example, I'd probably have to sit back and look at so many and try to determine which one I want to choose from. But I can look back on one incident that took place early on in my career. I've been in the financial services industry now for 43 years, starting back in the 70s. And not too long into my career, accepted a new job. In my first annual review, I went into my boss's office and I sat down. He's a white male. Of course, you see, I am a black man. And I sat in front of his desk, and the very first words out of his mouth that basically told me what I was up against for my duration there, with the employment there. He sat behind his desk, he looked me right in my eyes, and he said to me without a smile or anything, without breaking stride, he said, "I'm quite sure you understand, because you're black, you have to work twice as hard to look as good as your white peers." And that told me right then, you know, look, you're in for a fight. My response to him, you know, and you know, from the time I was young, I had my little 4'11" grandmama. She made it clear to me that I was going to face a lot of challenges as I grew and as I became an adult, and dealing as far as being a black man in this world. And she said, you know, you're going to have to fight your challenges yourself. You're going to have to face your challenges, and without batting an eye, you know, always hold your head up, look straight in the face, and you fight. You don't sit back and accept anything. And my response to him basically was letting him know that, yes, I know that, but the main issue, my concern, is the fact that I know that you know this, but you don't want to admit the true reason as to why it's that way.
Wow. Thanks for sharing.
That's exactly what I said. And from that point forward, it was an uphill battle the whole time. And I mean, my fight goes all the way back. My first experience was I was a sophomore in high school when I started facing racism, and basically on a personal level, and I had to fight. So, see, that one incident is one that always plays in my mind when that was said to me, my first annual review on that job. And it was pretty painful, but my fight was, I thank God for the strength that he gave me.
Wow. Renee, why don't you jump on in here? What have your experiences been? I know you've been busy here lately, but tell me, kind of reflect back on some of your experiences.
Unfortunately, there's so many. So which one do I draw from today, right? So I guess it depends on my mood. So my mood today is, I'll talk about when I was a young woman at City National Bank Financial Institution in California. And I was told that I wasn't officer material. And I asked why. And the reasons were quite vague. I didn't have a certain background that they thought I needed to have because they had made some assumptions because of my color. And I grew up in San Diego. I didn't grow up in the traditional, what the media says Black people grow up as. I lived in a home that had a guest house on the property. My father died when I was very young. My mother invested well. Credit, life, and disability insurance, I'm all for that. And that helped us to achieve a level of median income that really worked. And so I was raised with a woman who said, go for whatever you want. So I don't know no. I don't take no. So when I was told that I couldn't be a bank officer because of those different reasons, I jumped through the hoops. I continued to jump through the hoops. And in that 6-year career of that organization, I did become a bank officer. I was a course designer for the largest ATM network on the West Coast. But I had to go through hoops. Every single time there was something. And being judged by white people who didn't understand the Black experience at all, would say racist things and expect for you to be okay. Another opportunity or another time, 20 years later, working for another organization, interviewing actually. And in the interview, the HR manager said, you know, we're known for not hiring Blacks into management. Why do you want to work here? And I had on for the men who wear black and gold, I had on a black and gold outfit. And I said to her, well, then that's exactly why you need me, because I'm not afraid to be here and to be in management. You've probably missed a lot of opportunities. And so what happens is people well-intentioned white people are great, and that's good. But the people who are misguided, who don't understand why you can't say certain things to people, you can crush them. And so what I'm grateful for, like Andre, I'm grateful for my mom, I'm grateful for my grandparents who made sure that we had a strong sense of self. I really didn't know I was a Black woman until I got to college. And so that probably is the reason for why I am so confident in my delivery. And sometimes that confidence throws people off. I should be meek. I should have a softer voice. Well, that's not who I am. That's not how I was raised. And so because of how I was raised, and embracing everyone, we grew up in a very multicultural neighborhood. And so we were all for our community. And so it throws people off, especially people who are in position of power, when you're not a stereotype. And so whatever the images that they have for media, that's what they think you're supposed to be. So just a couple of instances. So thank you for asking. And thank you, John, for doing this panel for us. I think it's terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. So I'd like to, since we had Samira took up so much time, I want to bring Jill into the conversation. And of course, Jill is part of a diversity consulting firm. And she is a white woman, but she is an ally for AACUC. And I just want to kind of get a sense of, what has she witnessed, or, tell me about any of your observations or why you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Adrian. I appreciate that. And I'm going to reference your comment earlier to this being a safe space and use a moment of confession here. And I will say, to borrow Renee's term, I have been a well-intentioned white person for a long time. And what I've come to realize over the past couple of years is that well-intentioned white people are typically not doing enough, regardless of where those intentions are. And I came to my work in diversity, equity, and inclusion through a path that was very focused on white feminism. And I learned a lot once I started to get into that about how not comprehensively inclusive that was. And as I continued through that journey, what I came to realize is that, and I'm still very much learning, because I'll say, when John told me I was on the racism panel today instead of the DEI panel, I said, well, there must be some mistake. I don't talk about racism, I talk about DEI. But my statement is that white people need to be in this fight on racism. And when we're talking about being allies, we need to be really clear on what that term ally means. Because it can't be, I will help you in your fight against racism. It must be a belief that we are all aligned against racism together. And we must recognize, we being white people in this case, must not disregard the role that we as white people have played in constructing that system, and therefore the responsibility we have in taking this on as our fight to dismantle that. When I look at the reason why this has become so important to me is that my love is for credit unions. I've been in the credit union space my entire career. I believe in what credit unions can do. And when you look at those numbers that Samira shared with us, and you see that very clear link between racism and economic inequality, I don't see how this fight against racism is not one of a credit union fight. And so for any of us who are so privileged to have a career in this system, I don't see how we can't not stand up against racism with that and take that on as though it's our own battle. So that's what's brought me into this space. And again, I'm still very much learning on this. And Renee's been an excellent guide for me through part of this, a partner for me in this. And that would be my statement, though. The reason I care is that dismantling racism, addressing this, becoming anti-racism is a critical place for credit unions to be if we're going to fulfill our mission.
Oh, certainly. Thank you for being in the fight, Jill. Appreciate that. So I want to turn it to our second question. And so we know what the problem is, and we hear the experiences, we hear about the observations that have been witnessed. We saw the data. And so we know there is a problem. And so the question is, what solutions or what can we do about this problem? And so my second question is, what solutions, changes would you like to see to dismantle systemic racism? And so I want to turn it back to Samira. What can credit unions do to dismantle structural racism? What can they do?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I agree wholeheartedly that we do have a role to play. You know, there's a lot of work going on, and I think a lot of effort around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think, you know, there's an increasing commitment to DEI, and this work includes kind of removing the inequities in financial services that impact Black, Brown, Indigenous, LGBTQ plus women, you name it. And while it is vital, while it is important, I also think that it's only one piece of the puzzle in terms of what's needed to dismantle inequitable systems and reckon with this history of racial injustice. That said, I think that it is a really good vehicle for credit unions to use to kind of try and address these issues. You know, and they're, you know, by using a DEI lens in our work, I really think it can help us ask the right questions in terms of, for example, products and services that maybe appear race neutral, but if you use a DEI lens and you do an assessment asking who's benefiting, who's being burdened, are we extending the benefits of these products to those communities that are historically marginalized, historically underserved? I mean, systematic lens, right? That's in terms of the external. You got to know your members as well, right? You've got to know what are their pain points and understand, for example, that I come from a very mixed background, part Arab, part Hispanic, and both sides, we have multi-generational households, right? So and multi-generational and cousins and I mean, everything living under one roof. So when one person loses a job, that has a ripple effect like you can't believe throughout the entire family. So understanding that, like understanding how that, you know, who your members are and how they relate to financial services and developing products and services. So that's what DEI can do for us. But in order to understand them, we need to become more inclusive. We need to become more equitable. We need to become more diverse as organizations. So I think that's one way. Education is obviously part of it. Credit unions can also be investing in, you know, you purchase things through your supply chain. You can be investing in Black-owned businesses. How about, you know, who are you partnering with? You know, are you partnering with organizations that, for example, support, you know, communities of color? So I think there's this lens that can be used both internally and externally, can really help us as credit unions to certainly work to dismantle structural racism. There's certainly much more we can do, but I think it is an important place to start, recognizing the limitations, recognizing that there's got to be more than just DEI.
Okay, great. So I want to turn it back to Jill. And so what solutions or changes would you like to see? And you mentioned a little bit in your talk earlier. What would you like to see?
I think that this goes both at an individual level and at an organizational systemic level specific to credit unions. When I hear Andre tell the story about his white boss telling him, well, this is something you need to overcome, to me, that is an example of a place where individual expansion of knowledge and understanding is so important, because that goes beyond acknowledging Andre, I recognize that you might deal with the systemic racism, to saying, Andre, I recognize that as your boss, it is my job to come along and help overcome this. And I think that too many leaders in our system do not have the capacity to know how to come alongside and work on that. So from an individual level, I want to see the leaders in our system, anyone who manages another person, to expand their capacity for this understanding and that work in that. Quick resource recommendation. I have gained a lot out of the 28-day journey through a book called Me and White Supremacy. And it's been really critical, I think, in building some expanded understanding of that. So from an individual perspective, I think changing the way we lead our organizations will expand our ability to promote and provide opportunities, and honestly, just removing the obstacles and barriers that exist. So not telling Andre he needs to work twice as hard, not telling Renee that we don't let Black people be officers in our organization. And when we expand those individual roles and capacity for that leadership, that will change how we serve. What will then happen is we will end up with that more diversified workforce. And in that, we will have people who understand some of those product and services solutions that need to be created and delivered differently. And when we start to introduce those products and services and deliver them to people in a way that truly moves them toward affordable credit and wealth building products and services, and start to close that racial wealth gap, I think we'll start to see some other strides and advances toward greater equality in all areas.
Okay. So Jill, I mentioned earlier that you started a diversity consulting firm, and you've actually unveiled a goal to ensure women and people of color represent 30% of C-suite and other key leadership positions in the movement by 2030. So how should an organization look at itself? And then, of course, what metrics, goals, and accountability should an organization adopt? How would you look at that? What would you do?
So the first thing I'll say on that is it's extraordinary to me how in the same breath we can talk about DEI as a critical business case and then shy away from setting any sort of metrics. And what I often say when I'm working with credit unions is, like, I do a lot of credit union strategic planning, and we'll go in and talk, and they'll say, we're going to grow our lending next year by 15%. And they say lending is core to who we are. It's core to how we serve our businesses. We're going to grow our loans by 15%. We're going to hold our leaders accountable. And I assure you that if at the end of the year, they go to their chief lending officer and say, how'd things go? And the chief lending officer says, man, it was a really hard year for lending. We just didn't have the right applicants come in for our loans. So we didn't actually move the needle on that. But I'm sure you understand, because it was real hard, right? Like, I mean, you lose your job if you don't reach that goal. Not just credit unions, organizations won't set the same metrics and goals in place for diversity hiring and promotion. And so leaders might be told, it's really important that you look to diversify your senior leadership team. It's really important that you build a succession plan of diverse candidates and prospects. And then we don't hold leaders accountable to that. So what I want to see is credit unions that say, DEI, diversity is, we have a business case for diversity and we care about this, and we are willing to commit to the metrics in place that demonstrate we have leadership. And I don't just mean executive leadership, I mean volunteer leadership as well, that reflects the community we are trying to serve and that moves us toward that goal. And then does hold leaders accountable for that, base compensation on that, base performance incentive plan on that, in the same way you would with any financial metric that you set, because I believe it's equally important to the business, maybe more important to the business, because the humans that are in there running the business is what will allow for that additional economic capacity, financial strength to come into play later. So metrics set and specific to ensuring that you have women and people of color in every finalist interview you do for a senior executive position, looking at your board makeup and trying to actually match that to what your community is, looking at your senior executive team. There's a statistic, unfortunately it's changed a little bit, but most men, over 50% of men, say that if there is one woman on a 10-person executive team, that means women are well represented. We work in financial services, we work with numbers. We know that if 51% of the population is represented by 10% representation, those numbers don't actually align. My sense is that people will say if we have one person of color, then we're diverse, and it's just not reality. So setting those metrics that actually align with and reflect the community, and then holding people accountable for that is critically important.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to turn it back to Andre. And so you mentioned your experience earlier, and certainly heartfelt. And so from your viewpoint, what would you like to see in this industry? What solutions?
Well, for starters, Jill, when you mentioned the word leadership, perfect. Because if leaders don't buy in, it's not going to happen. You need leaders. And when I say not just leaders, I'm talking about leaders all the way up the ladder, all the way to the leaders of the country. You need to have all this. One thing I do know is over the years, I've been in this fight now, but it's been 49 years, and I'm thinking back to when I was in high school, whatever, but I'm seeing some of the same things today that I was seeing back then. And it's painful. And I've had to be honest, in preparing myself and thinking about this panel discussion today, it brought back a lot of pain, and thinking about, things that I've endured over the years. When I mentioned about my grandmother telling me, you're going to have to fight. You see so many things happen over the years, and when blacks have died, certain things have happened. I was right in the middle of the Martin Luther King riots, and you see all this momentum start, and it's like, we're starting to fight for the rights for blacks, and what happens is during that fight, you get promises, maybe some little changes, and what happens? We sit back. The momentum goes away. All the way up to today, you've had this murder of a black man by a white police officer, George. And so we've got this momentum. When I think back, I played a little football, and if you got your offensive coaches calling plays, the quarterback is on point with his passes, your receivers are running good routes, your running backs are averaging 7, 8, 9 yards per carry, your line is blocking well, opening up. That momentum in that football game is there for that offense. And they keep that momentum going until the game ends. It's over. That's what we need to see. We need to see this momentum going. And don't stop. Don't accept the pacifier, the way you sit back and say, okay, well, this change has been made or that promise has been made. Okay, let's see what happens now. No, because there has not been a substantial change. You're going to see the same things happen again. And not just on that leadership level, or not just on corporate levels, we as individuals. I have personally fought a number of battles, and I've stood toe to toe with bosses, supervisors. I've experienced N-word. Y'all sent all blacks back to Africa. All types of various types of treatment. Whereas we have to stand as individuals and also fight some of our own battles and say, not that I'm going to get violent, or I'm going to let you know who I am, and I am not going to tolerate this. Unfortunately, the racism is, and I see it as a learned behavior, all right? And it's a system where the way a person feels and thinks, you can't change that. That's almost impossible to change. I'm not going to try to change so much the way you feel, the way you think, but I am going to change the way you treat me. You can believe and feel whatever you want, but this fight has to continue until the entire system, everything, you're not going to treat me this way. You can believe what you want, feel what you want, think what you want. I don't mind, but you're not going to treat me any less than the way you want to be treated. And this is how I've always carried myself. This is what my 4 foot 11 inch grandmama, and she was a powerhouse at 4 feet 11 inches. And she said, Andre, you need to stand toe to toe and fight your way through life. But when does this end? We have to keep this momentum going until it ends. Don't stop. This is what I think needs to happen. And again, Jill, so what you said, leadership has to be on board. You've got to get the right leaders in place to where we can bring this racism to an end, and all of us are looked at not by color, but by who we are as individuals, as people, as human beings. I am no different than anybody else. And I deserve to be treated that way. But without that constant momentum and pushing forward, If you stop momentum, then you lose the game, you lose the fight. We cannot continue this fight. For me, it's not so much as it is now where I worry about my grandchildren. I don't want them to be sitting here saying the same thing that I'm saying when they get to my age. When does this stop? And how are we going to fight as a whole, and also us as individuals demanding the respect and the treatment that we are supposed to get? I don't mind sharing my stories with anybody. People that I work here at the association, I've shared my stories in the past. And I have no problem sharing it. And I have no problem letting you know how I feel and letting you know how I am not going to be treated.
Speaking of momentum, Renee, you've been busy here lately. And so what solutions, changes would you like to see to dismantle this systemic and structural racism? You're on mute. You're on. Okay, there you go.
So as Jill said, we're in a safe space. So the first thing that I'm going to ask our well-meaning people who are our allies, if you wouldn't say to your white colleague, "You're so articulate," don't say it to a Black colleague. I'm gonna let that sit for just a couple of seconds. Typically, most of us who are around white people in our professional career, we've heard that. Have you all heard that on the call? The Black people, you've heard that. "You're so articulate. You're so articulate," as if that's a shock. Well, why would that be a shock? Especially if I have a degree and you say that's the measurement by which we're going to be measured. So that's another tangent. Let me stop. What can we do to make sure that we move this forward? Stop playing the blame game. There's enough blame to go around. All sides are complicit. One of the reasons why ACC got into action after the murder of George Floyd is because if we had been silent, we would be complicit. We cannot be complicit any longer. It is the tipping point. And Andre, I promise you, your grandchildren will not be having this conversation. The commitment to change, Credit Unions Unite Against Racism. I believe credit unions can make the difference. Credit unions are built on the philosophy of people helping people. We all bleed red, not green like the Vulcans in my Star Trek series. We bleed red. So there's so much for us together. I think that if we're all intentional, I say that often, we have to be intentional. Treat people the way you want to be treated. How would you do this if it were your son, your daughter, your sister, your mother, your brother? You have to look at it that way. I believe that if we share our stories, if we have conversations, if we're open and honest, and we agree to be open and honest, that things can change. It's only until you, as Samir said with Jay-Z, when you reveal it, it can be healed. But if you don't talk about it, you don't know. So for instance, in the credit union industry, we know that there are 6, out of $314 billion credit unions, there are 6 African-Americans that are leading those credit unions. 3 of them happen to be ACC members: John Hamilton at MECU Credit Union, Timothy Anderson at United States Federal Credit Union, United States Senate Federal Credit Union, Local Government Federal Credit Union, and Civic Federal Credit Union led by CEO Maurice Smith. Don Lewis from Aberdeen Proving Ground. Those men are very, very intentional about leading that organization. They're leading billion-dollar organizations that are doing it quite well. So we need to see more of that. Out of 300 credit unions, only 6? Now, we know the African-American CEOs for a reason. We were intentional. We had a league president help us get the information. The leagues rallied around us and gave us that information. We need that information. We need that data, the numbers. We need that information so we can tell if we're making a difference. That's one of the things that has to be done. We've got to capture the data. Who's in the C-suites? Who's in the boardroom? If we don't know that, we can't tell you we're making a difference. We can't tell you that that change is happening. Again, you don't want to have diversity hires, but just like you have BSA officers, I believe you should have a diversity officer. I think that that would be something that could help make sure that credit unions adhere to a standard that credit unions decide they want to have. So I think, again, more discussion, like Andre said, don't lose the momentum, and being intentional. To me, and treating people the way you want to be treated. There's so many things to do on a big structural level, but it comes from people and the leaders who are driving change. So be intentional about driving change, be honest and upfront. And if you don't know something, ask. So we have to have more conversations, and we have to be in action. So make sure that you're doing something in action every day to help move the needle forward.
Thank you. So Renee, I'm not going to let you off the hook just yet. Can you tell us about what the credit unions have done as an example to help us in this space that we're currently in?
Do you mean credit unions that have supported ACC?
Right. So recently, Caroline Willard and John spoke to us and talk about that initiative.
So Adrian and I get this email from Caroline and John asking us if we could have a conversation, because the leagues were so intrigued about commitment to change that they decided they wanted to make a difference. And they didn't just make a difference, they made a huge difference. I'm getting checks for membership and a scholarship for commitment to change through the leagues. It's so extraordinary that I didn't know Nebraska had a credit union league. I didn't know Utah had a credit union league. I didn't know Iowa had a credit union league. So again, both sides are complicit. I didn't know they existed. And so they came together, they made a decision and acted so very quickly on that decision. So all these checks keep coming in. I'm like, oh my gosh. So whatever Caroline and John did to help us, that is extraordinary. And one of the things that I thought was so great was a 3-year commitment to do this. So I said, wow, if we could say that all of the leagues are members of ACUC, how extraordinary is that? And it's come to fruition. Never in the credit union space has that happened. They belong to CUNA because they're part of CUNA, but to all come together and be part of ACUC, it's gonna make me cry, because that level of commitment showing that those presidents see the big picture, they get it, they want to help. Tom Kane, Illinois Credit Union League, they had me do a talk, and right after they decided to do 100 memberships. It's that kind of involvement, that kind of support that shows the industry you mean business. Demonstrate you mean business. CQ of North Carolina, State Employees Credit Union of North Carolina, Mike Lord, they made a commitment to do $25,000 a year. That's our corporate partnership. He said, you know what? You're in this fight. We're in this with you. We're going to give you the money up front. We're not going to wait for 5 years. We're just going to go ahead and give it to you now. And there's still more support to come. Well, what kind of partner is that? You cannot deny how extraordinary that is. CUNA Mutual Group, they had already given us our sponsorship for a conference that we're not having. It's turned into a virtual session now. However, they've repurposed their sponsorship dollars that they were intentional about to do the commitment to change. Things like that. There's so many people who are making donations that are just extraordinary. Juneteenth donations, because people want, what can they do? Well, certainly if you donate to ACUC, we're a 501c3 nonprofit, in your donations, we can help further this conversation. We can help develop the programs that are going to help the credit unions to be better at DEI, to be better at breaking down the barriers of systematic racism. So the credit union leagues just have, to me, were the catalyst for the other organizations stepping up and doing much, much more, being involved and saying, we are going to make a difference, and this is how we're going to affect change. So thank you for asking that, Adrian. People would think that that's planned. It wasn't. So thank you. And I do want to say thank you to all of our credit unions who've stepped up. And we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Coastal Credit Union. Chuck Purvis just said, we're going to do $50,000. And that was at the start of a conversation to commitment for change call. So just, again, just rallying around, making sure that the voices are heard. And I want to say that the ACC membership is grateful. But we've got a lot of work to do,
Great. Thank you. And as AACUC chair, I just want to say thank you to the leagues, give a shout out to the leagues as well. Extraordinary effort. And thank you, Caroline, and thank you, John, for making it happen. So we do have a couple questions here before our time is out. And so I just want to see if we can get through these before our time is up. And so the first question seems like it's geared towards Samira. It said, interesting information on the wealth gap in home ownership. Has there been any research regarding credit scores? I review credit reports every day, and it's interesting the disparity that exists there. When I view them, it reminds me of redlining.
Yeah, that's, I think, a really important observation and question. In terms of the research, I don't think there's a whole heck of a lot out there, in part, and I might be wrong, but in part because sort of accessing the credit scores is a little challenging. I mean, you can purchase them, but they're really expensive. You can purchase anonymized. You know, there's data out there that you can. But you know, it's fairly well known that credit scores, because they don't take into account things like paying your rent regularly, paying your utility bills, and all that sort of thing on the regular, right? That there is some bias against, you know, certain groups, certainly, you know, people of color are included, oftentimes low income, that sort of thing. And so credit scores are incredibly powerful, obviously, from your vantage point. But I think, you know, part of what the industry has done, the credit score bureaus, is they've started to recognize this. They've put in place another score that actually tries, they're kind of experimenting, that tries to capture, you know, some of these other ways in which people are actually being very responsible with their finances, but it wasn't captured previously. So there is some work that's being done to come up with alternative credit scores. I don't know whether that is has become as widespread as it needs to. So I think that is, you've kind of put your finger on a real challenge that we need to be thinking about, especially now. So thank you for that question.
Great. So next question, really like to hear about what we can do to support future generations. I know this is so important in continuing change. Our teens and young adults difficult already with COVID and all the challenges. I'll just open that up to anybody.
I'm a huge advocate for mentorship. I think that statistically, it shows that people who are mentored, often by someone who doesn't look like them, so a woman who's mentored by a man, for example, are more positioned for longer term professional success. And I think that we as a system could do a lot to move forward with meaningful mentorship to kind of entry-level professionals in our system right now, but also people considering career paths, and bring them in, mentor them up, and move them forward.
Anybody else want to jump in there? Okay, so my time is almost up, and the last two questions really have to do with data. So what I'm going to do, since Samira is the data expert, I'm going to feed those questions to her, that she can answer the folks that actually ask those questions. And so as I kind of wind this thing down, and I really want to thank our panelists for being part of this today. Certainly Samira, Jill, Renee, and Andre, really want to thank you for being on this panel. And so I want to thank you for the open and honest and robust, in-depth conversation that we've had this morning. And also want to thank John Bratsakis just for the opportunity. You know, I certainly stand on the shoulders of those who have come before me. And I just want to end by saying that injustice and humanity anywhere is injustice and humanity everywhere. And so we're in an industry about people helping people. So there's so much that we can do, and we certainly can be intentional. When I started talking earlier, I talked about, we live in the richest country in the world, and access to healthcare, access to education, access to financial information, credit, capital, all those certain things. And so we can certainly do a better job. And so I like to finish by saying, live simply, care deeply, speak kindly, give of your time and treasure, take care of yourself, stay safe, and be kind to someone today. So I really appreciate everybody being on this panel as we talked about racism. I know we're going to transition and talk about DEI. And so, John, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Adrian. Thanks, everybody, for all of the great dialogue and for everybody for using the chat. And just a reminder, this is being recorded and we'll have the slides available. And I want to make sure, Renee warned me she's a teacher and an educator by trade, and I don't want to get lulled into what we in my family call Greek time. So we'll try to stay on track instead of going well over the timing. So Renee.
So one of the reasons why, so thank you, John, for that. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Awesome job. And panelists, excellent. And thank you for allowing me to participate with you. One of the reasons why I like for us to start on time and end on time is because Black people have a reputation of being late. And so it's very important at ACUC that we start on time and end on time. So with that, I will get right to it. Our panelist for this DEI section is our Samira Salem, and she's been introduced prior to this. Maria Martinez. Maria, we wave so people know who you are in the pretty red jacket. And she is the president and CEO of Board of Federal Credit Union. And Opal Tomaszewska is the senior manager at Multicultural Business Strategy at CUNA Mutual Group. Did you wave? Okay, great. And then we have Brett Knoll, who is president and CEO at Security Plus Federal Credit Union, and also on the Eastern Regional Chapter as an officer. He is the treasurer. And Wesley Williams, VP of Information Technology at Valley Star Credit Union. And so funny. And I think that's all my panelists. And I'm going to start with the first question. And Brett, I'm going to ask you the first question I have, and that is, what are the benefits of implementing a DEI program?
Well, I think there's a lot of benefits. From a business standpoint, there's a huge business case for doing it. I think, first of all, it increases productivity within your workplace. Having differences of opinion, having ideas that you might not otherwise have by hiring people who all look alike and think alike. It just brings diversity of thought. And beyond that, I think it increases the ability to innovate within a credit union as well. And I also firmly believe that diversity brings heightened employee satisfaction as well. And I think with higher satisfaction on the job from everybody, we serve our members better. I think people work harder, they look forward to going to work, and it just affects the productivity of the credit union. In addition to that, I think we would want to engage in a DEI effort for social responsibility reasons as well. We have a platform, we have the ability to change our country, change our world, and it's going to take all of us. It's not something that we have to look at other organizations and say, well, they're handling that, the politicians are handling that. It's on each and every one of us. And I think, I'm kind of representative of the over the hill white CEO crowd here. And first, I just want to thank you for allowing me to be part of this. I'm really honored by that. And, my message to other white CEOs, managers, leaders, is to look for diversity and don't be scared. Say it loud, say it proud. Black Lives Matter. Renee, did I just get struck down by lightning by saying that? I did not, right? Become aware of the problem. Talk to people. Listen to these stories that Andre shared, Adrian shared. Listen to these stories of the hardship that people went through, become aware, then acknowledge the problem. You know, acknowledge the fact that me as a white CEO, I have benefited from white privilege my entire life. I don't walk into a store and people don't look at me and go, is he going to steal something? I don't have problems getting a ride in a taxi. I haven't been denied a job interview because of the color of my skin or because I have a name that's different. You know, acknowledge this problem exists. Don't be afraid to tackle the problem and do something about it. And then once you decide to do something about it, don't just make it a one-time thing. It's got to be an ongoing effort, and you got to commit to it. You know, make it part of your credit union strategic plan. Just get people on board with the effort, top down, and do it, and don't stop doing it. And don't be scared.
Well, you've heard it from Brett. No, don't be scared, y'all. Don't be scared. The hashtag don't be scared. I like that. Okay. Maria, how do you make sure that everyone in your credit union feels included when you're doing this DEI journey? Kevin Martin likes to say the DEI journey, living the dream. So tell us about that.
I like the journey also. One of the things is that I feel that we must appreciate and celebrate everybody's difference. I think it's important that when we're talking about inclusion, that it's about making everyone feel welcome without even trying to change them. When we accept people for who they are, they tend to participate and contribute more also. And most of us that are leaders, we must be an ally. Supporting equal rights for others, I think it's important. I know, the other panel, they talked about leadership and making sure that the leaders are with the people that need them. I think everyone in a leadership role should be an ally in helping to create a safe and more welcoming and inclusive environment. Show off your staff. I think brag about them, show them off in front of others, praise them for their accomplishments and make them feel part of the team. The other thing that we do a lot of that here at the credit union is celebrate any cultural differences and events. Why not, have a small gathering or something to tell the members or to tell the public that you're celebrating Juneteenth, you're celebrating Cinco de Mayo, you're celebrating, any festivity like that. It's important that we have that and maybe even get a group together, make them feel part of it, somebody that puts together these events. You also have to construct a more inclusive culture, implement a zero tolerance policy, no harassment. It's important that you get the word out. It's once you make people feel part of it, they're gonna feel good about it and they're gonna give more to you.
So Maria, I'm going to put you on the spot. Didn't plan on doing this, but I let the spirit move me, honey. So why don't you tell everyone about NowCup? Because a lot of people say, I didn't know ACC existed. So I imagine they say that about NowCup as well.
Well, and I think we hear that more, Renee, because we're not a very active organization. We meet once a year at GAC. We have a networking event that I think it's a very classy event. We invite some of the congressmen and to come and speak. But NowCup, it's an organization that was started back in 2006. And through that, it was just a group. I remember we were in North Carolina and we were it was over some drinks that we started talking. It was a group of mostly Hispanic individuals. And we started talking about why not create a group that could cater within our credit union industry to Hispanics. And so we started this as a networking event, and all we do is just network with each other and tell people about the opportunities that are out there. For me, it's very important. There's, as you can see, sometimes I get calls from others that say, hey Maria, can you send me some names of some of the CEOs or maybe some of the C-suite people that are Hispanics. And really, Renee, when I'm looking at it, I can't find too many of us out there. It's really hard. So, but I know among some of the young professionals, some of the people that are coming up the ranks, there's many of them out there. Just like there's, Black people, there's Hispanics that, we need to encourage them to move up the scale. I'm a big advocate and I'm always willing to mentor others that want to move up the scale. in order to, so they can take the leadership roles. I think it's important that we are very inclusive under that. Many of you may not know, but when I became the CEO, before I became the CEO, the position opened. And at that time, I also became pregnant. And so I told my husband I was not going to tell anybody, because I told him, I said, look, you know, I'm Hispanic, I'm a woman, and I'm a pregnant woman now. And they're not going to give me the job. So I kind of hid my pregnancy for like 5 months until they gave me the job, and then I announced it to the world. But it was hard, you know, having to go through something like that. And I know many other people have gone through situations like that.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you so much. Opal, tell us why DEI is a business case and how it affects the bottom line.
Absolutely, and thank you all for having me and everyone on the panel. This has been amazing and inspiring. I'm on the panel, but I'm over here taking notes at the same time. So I think the first thing is to say that there is a business case for DEI. For a while, I was thought of as something nice to do, or it was the right thing to do, and it most certainly is the right thing to do, but there definitely is a bottom line impact. In the MCOE, one thing that we say in the Multicultural Center of Expertise is that diverse teams make better business decisions. And we've seen trends and information on this all over, but we've also seen it firsthand at CUNA Mutual Group as well. So when you think about input, if everyone's the same, you're going to get the same input. Your innovation is going to be limited. You're not going to have the perspective that you need. We also know that the population is getting more and more diverse. So younger generations like Millennial and Gen Z are already more than 50% people of color. And we say that by 2040, it's predicted that it will be a minority majority. So if you don't have that representation on your teams, you're not able to be of service to the population as it's changing as well. And on the flip side of that, diverse teams make better business decisions. There's really this consumer expectation now, or your member expectation, when we're thinking about credit unions. So we've seen this trend, especially with younger generations, and also with multicultural groups and with women, that they're really concerned about where their money is going, where they are spending money with. Are they spending money with companies that are making good decisions for people of color, that are making good decisions for the betterment of social change as well? And really, we did our own research as well, and we found that especially multicultural consumers want to do business with businesses that are a fabric of their community, that are giving back to the community in certain ways, and that are employing people who look like them as well. We saw early after COVID-19 came out, Cantor came out with some great research that said, as I think it was mentioned before a little bit, that consumers are, and people as a whole, are felt let down by governments, feel let down by systems, and they're really looking to brands, organizations, and companies to do the right thing and to lead them in this way. So again, this is an expectation. And as Brett said earlier, if your CEO is not saying Black Lives Matter, then what is your CEO saying? Silence right now is speaking volumes. So if you don't have that diversity within your teams, and you don't have a DEI journey that you're currently on, you're not going to feel comfortable making those statements. You're probably not going to know when to make those statements. But if you have a team behind you and you've made a decision and a commitment to DEI, then you're going to be in a much better position when it comes to your company as a whole and that bottom line.
So Opal, I'm going to put you on the spot as well, because that's what I do best, but not intentional. I am so pleased and proud of Bob Trunzo, CEO of CUNA Mutual Group. He is intentional about
Absolutely.
DEI. I want to say that he is and CMG are the leaders in this industry in doing that. Angela Russell has done a phenomenal job with her staff and her department, making sure that everybody knows almost anything that she knows about DEI, which is phenomenal. That slide is burned in my head, the equity slide. So what I want everyone to know, Opal, is when I met you, you were a project coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, tell us about how quickly you went from project coordinator to where you are now, because it was less than 4 years, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think my story, and Angela will say this as well, is definitely a DEI story. And most of you know that CUNA Mutual Group is a very large organization. it is not as easy. It may take a while to stick out, but ERG leadership is one of the first places that I was able to have my voice heard within the company. I was able to do where I met Renee. I was able to start using my talents in spoken word. And if you're not familiar with what that is, it's a form of poetry with rhythm. It's an African-American art form. Angela is familiar with that art form. So there was an appreciation from it from a higher level. And I was able to start to look at telling the story of our strategy using spoken word, to do things like the focus program where I met Renee, and be able to share some of those things. And once people hear you, see you as a person, as a mind, then that changes. So I was able to start to use my talent and my passion, I think, for DEI to really start working, and then working with the Multicultural Center of Expertise, where I'm passionate about things that we're talking about today, be it racism and the DEI journey as well.
Thank you for that. Thank you, appreciate that. Wesley, your journey. Tell us about your DEI journey.
Yeah, that's great. Well, look, first, let me thank you, Renee, and definitely John, and definitely want to thank all the participants. You know, my DEI journey, it's been interesting. I will say from my experience, Renee, you know, I am very blessed to have parents who experienced a lot of like what Andre is talking about, some of the stories we've heard. My father came from a third world country in South America, and he had to work extremely hard. To Andre's point, he was told, and it was ingrained in his mind, that he had to work very, very hard just to make it, especially coming over here to America. And so I was blessed to have been propped up and maybe given some things that others, some of my peers, wouldn't have had. And so with that, you know, I've always worked hard to try to set myself apart. In relation to this conversation, I think it has really helped. You know, I have my own experiences where definitely have felt like the token Black person in the room on more occasions than I can tell you. You know, but I've learned that I can't let that define who I am. I can't let that hold me back. I have to use that and propel forward, right? And so part of my journey has been wanting to break into these systems myself in order so that younger folks, my peers, can see that, hey, as a Black man, as a Black woman, as a person of color, if Wes can do it, hey, I can do it. And if I'm able to share my story, then others can hear that and say, hey, I have an opportunity. How did he do it? Let's have this conversation. And so, you know, I was similar to Opal, blessed and have a CEO who I worked with down in South Georgia, and fresh out of college. And fast forward, long story short, he moved up to Virginia, took over the CEO role. And like Andre said earlier, he really judged me by the content of my character. There wasn't much he knew about me because we really only talked every now and then, but he knew I worked hard, and he knew that I would get the job done, that I was a results-oriented type of person. And so within that, he spoke to diversity, and not only diversity. I will say part of what made me successful is, you know, there's the conversation about equality, right, Renee? And that's just leveling the playing field. Equity is when you prop someone up. So don't just give me a position, but then give me the resources and tools I need to be successful in that position. And so through that, you know, I've been able to be a vice president at a very young age, and as a Black man. And, you know, my hat is off to the organization, Valley Star, my president, CEO, definitely. But again, that's just one piece of it. I think the lesson is that for the presidents, the leadership who we're speaking to today is, again, don't just do diversity to say, hey, I'm going to put this person in a spot, check the box, right, Renee? No, go the next step and include them, give them resources, prop them up, put them around people who can help them and pour into them. And I think that's where we'll really see a change.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I'm gonna tell everybody that was not the question that he was supposed to have. So thank you for answering that so brilliantly. So, all righty. Okay. So, Wesley, when you got your title, when you got the job as vice president, how did your parents feel?
You hit me with all kind of new questions. So, you know, they were astounded. I mean, they were elated. I'm the first one in my family to have graduated college, and not only college, but got a master's degree and got on. And so no one in our family has been in this position, especially as a Black male in America. And so, you know, my dad, I think for both of them, probably just brought them to tears. My dad, of course, he was probably like, I knew you could do it. And the way my dad's mind works, he's like, all right, what's next? You know, that's not enough. You gotta keep going. But I think in the moment for both of them, it was definitely just one of those moments as a parent where it's just like, wow, not only do you see the hard work where you've poured into your child come to fruition, but also I think what really resonates is that Black people can make it. It showed even them who may have not been able to progress to that level in their own life, like they can live vicariously through me, right? And I think that was very important for them. And I know that if they were here to answer that question, they'd probably just tell you, Renee, they were just speechless, right? But again, it speaks to giving back. And so many of the panelists have already said it. We have to reach back, right? So part of my parents would also say, Wes, that's why my dad says, Wes, don't stop. Because if you stop there, then that's cool for you, but what about everybody else? What about those around you? And so as you're able to climb the ladder, whatever that looks like, wherever that looks like, you have to continue to reach back and do the same thing for others in the way that it was given to you.
So it is not the Renee and Wesley show, but I do have another question for you. So when Tim Anderson was chairman of ACUC, he insisted that we reach out to young people, and you were our first chair of our Young Professionals Summit. Tell us about that experience and why it was so important.
Yeah, definitely. So for those on the call, the panelists, I'm still a millennial. I think I might be teetering on the edge of that. But I saw from my experience, my lens, just this huge gap between who everybody wanted to talk to. There was this huge conversation, in some ways still is, about how do we market to millennials? How do we talk to them? How do we get them in leadership positions? And I wanted to be a part of that conversation. And so thanks to Renee and Tim and the rest of the AACUC board, again, y'all empowered me. You said, hey, here's an opportunity. They put me in it, you guys, and then say, go to work. And I think what we saw was just an influx of young folks who want to be a part of this conversation, who want to be a part of change, right? And that's the beautiful thing about the millennial generation and the generation coming up. I think it was, I can't remember, maybe Adrian, who said that, you know, racism and things like that are taught. And you can see with the younger generations that they sometimes it's like almost a foreign concept, because they're like, as a young person, they have so many friends of different backgrounds and different colors. And so they want to be a part of the solution. And I think what we saw during that time, Renee, is just so many eyes open, is the best way I can put it, to young folks saying, man, I see my peers. I see Adrian Johnson. I see Opal. I see Andre. I see Tim, and so many other names, so many titans in the industry. And even for myself, and saying, man, I see someone who's done it. And now that rings true for me, and I'm ready to go get it myself. And so I think that was just an amazing thing we put together. And I'm glad I had the opportunity to lead it.
Thank you. You did an amazing job, and what a great handoff for Opal. So Opal's now the chair, with her vice chair being Brittany Taylor from Together Credit Union. So thank you both so much. I'm going to go to Samira now. Samira's been waiting patiently, and we're not chastising you for. I loved all your slides. I thought they were brilliant. So thank you for doing them. I love when we receive great education. Samira, I want to know, in your opinion, what is the role of DEI in this moment? But I have another question for you to answer first.
Okay.
So CUNA is not very diverse, but you look like you're diverse. So I'm thrilled that you're hired there. Tell me about the process. So when you decided to come to CUNA, why did you choose CUNA?
So I'm the kind of person that my values and who I am, what drives me and what motivates me, you know, is really important to, you know, where I end up working. To my career path has been that I started working on issues of poverty, and I started doing international economic development when I first started off, because that connects to my heart, and that connects to my brain. I got to have both things working, right? And it connects to my heart for a very personal reason. You know, both of my parents were immigrants, right? And both of my parents came from you know, difficult backgrounds and ended up in this country and were able to make something of themselves, and were able to, despite the odds and despite the, yes, racism that they faced in this country, were able to overcome it. My brother and I witnessed that. We saw, they took us back to the countries that they were from, Egypt and Guatemala. We saw the depths of poverty. We saw the racism in those countries. And I think that planted a seed in me to always feel like, what can I do to make things better, right? What can I do to contribute? And I've been given a lot of opportunities in this country. I'm in a place of, you know, privilege because of my education that my parents were able to support. And in other cases, not so much. My name doesn't help. You know, try to go through an airport with me, Samira Abu Saud Salam, that does not help. I'm always screened like 2 and 3 times. So, you know, I've experienced both, I've witnessed both, I've seen both. And for me, when I choose a place to work, it's about where can I make a difference? You know, and in this case, the credit union industry, because of the values and because the conversations that I saw that were going on and that were starting at that point, I felt like, yeah, this is the moment to jump in. This is a moment where I feel like I can make a difference, where my training will come in and I can bring something to the table. And yeah, it felt right. And so I felt like I found my home, and I found my tribe in credit union people and the work that's happening. And it's so value driven. It's so mission driven. So yeah.
Okay. All right. So okay, and CUNA's lucky to have you, and we're happy that you're there, because the information that you continue to provide is extraordinary. I don't think that level of data has existed prior to you coming, and so thank you for that. Every time you bring yourself in your slides, there's new information that's so great, because you stay current, and we appreciate that. We need people of color making sure that the data is correct. And so thank you for that, truly. So what do you think? We've got organizations like ACUC, Inclusive, Now Cup. We have those organizations that were traditionally created because of the lack of diversity in the credit union movement. What now do you feel is DEI's role with the credit union movement?
Yeah, it's I think it's an important time. You know, it's on the one hand, I feel like we've got some momentum that was building up even pre-pandemic. And when the pandemic hit, there was this nervousness that people were going to drop it, right? And then focus on other like priorities of the day. And there were voices out there. There was Angela Russell, yourself, other folks out there going, no, 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 no. This is important now. We need to continue working on this because look at the COVID-19 impacts. Look who's being impacted, right? I mean, look, it's all connected. And so I think people are seeing this and people are hearing it. Right. And increasingly, there is more and more interest. Like, what is it? What's it about? How can we start? What do we need to be doing? Right. And I think that is energizing. Right. And there is more of an urgency around this work. And it is important for the reasons that Jill was talking about, for the reasons that Maria was talking about in terms of the inclusion, and Brett. And, when I was talking earlier about how this can be one of the tools, right, that credit unions can use to address structural racism, right, and structural racism and all of the potential negative impacts that come out of that, right? And so at this moment, when we've got these two crises going on, I think we got to take advantage of this moment and really drive it home. So if it's one thing, I think it's really important, but we also have to recognize the limitations. That is DEI, good, and I think it's important, and there is an urgency, but there are more things that need to be done outside of DEI and that credit unions can contribute to, right? Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I was when ACC started to do the Commitment for Change conversation series, Say What You Mean. I take coaching from anybody. You can be younger than me, you can be older than me. I believe in hearing out everybody. Dwayne Day at MeQ, he says to me, Renee, we are not a social justice organization. We are a group of professionals that do finance. Make sure you keep it about finance. And it was such a great tidbit of information. And here's why. That's how we can change it. It's about the economics. As Adrian Johnson would say, it's about the facts. The facts are economically, we're not the same. So we don't have the same privileges, we don't have the same opportunities. So if we look at that from a credit union standpoint, what can we do? How can we provide value? How can we provide products and services that bring up the equality, that make up the equity? So I want us to always remember when we're looking through our credit union lens as credit union practitioners, that we have the power to make the change. We already have the rules. The rules are people helping people. What does that look like for you? What does that look like for your organization? Okay, I'm getting ready to go off on my tangent, so let me stop and I'm going to ask Jill. I know that you weren't part of this panel, Jill, but I'd like for you, because this is your life's work right now, I'd like for you to take a moment to talk about the organizations that are saying, what can we do? So what are 3 things that organizations can do to prepare themselves to get on that DEI journey?
So thank you, Renee. I appreciate the chance to speak. I think that I guess I don't know if this is the 3 things to do, but the process that I want to see organizations take, I want them to understand their baseline, to know where they are now. So do an assessment of how the organizational culture feels. And by that, I don't mean ask the people in power what they state that their organizational culture is, because what you hear, this is true throughout history, but this is true of our organizations as well. What you hear from those people who hold the power is very different from what you hear from all of the people. So that initial kind of voice of the employee response, understanding that baseline, assessing those policies and processes in place. Samira used a great statement earlier. Really look at, if you have a leave policy, or you have a hiring policy, or you have certain requirements before you will interview somebody for a job, who does that benefit? Who does that burden? And really taking that look to understand where you are today. Second, really look at your community And I can't tell you how many times I'm working with somebody and they'll say, well, you don't understand. We can't get anybody other than these white people on our board of directors because in our community, there's only white people here. No, you only know the white people. And if you don't believe me, go look at a kindergarten classroom right now, because that kindergarten classroom is multicultural like crazy. And those children have parents in the community who live there, and they're just not who you know. So understand your baseline where you are today, then understand your community and where the community you need to reflect is, and then take the action that goes. It's a capacity building for anyone who manages someone in that organization. Policy changes, equity in the way you are hiring people, and then the benefits you have in place and how they're designed to retain others. And then you set those metrics and you hold people accountable. And gosh, it was just too hard is not an appropriate excuse. If that's what, if you let your leaders pass with that on any other area that's an important business initiative, I would surmise that those financial metrics that you're being asked to look at are probably not where they need to be. And in the same way that you shouldn't let it pass with any other metric, you can't let it pass with DEI either. You can't give people a, gosh, it's really hard, or what is it, Brett says, don't be scared, right? You can't, like, people might not like it. It might feel icky if we set metrics around this. Don't be scared, take that action. So know where you are today, know where you have to be, and then commit to the action that gets you there.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. And maybe you could type it up in the chat for people so they can take it with them. Okay. All right. Brett, I have a question for you. You are the coolest white guy. You are the approved white guy. You are an ally that we trust. Tell me, how much pressure is that for you?
No pressure. You know, if you do what's right, that's the most important thing. You know, it's not pressure. You know, I do think about, though, some places that I've come from. You know, right now I work in a minority depository institution. That means more than 50% of my board, more than 50% of my membership is African American. I've worked at other places that haven't been that diverse. I worked in upstate New York at a credit union outside Rochester. I worked in a credit union in Ohio, and I worked in a credit union in Virginia. Some of those credit unions had very little diversity. Where I'm at now, I feel like this is the right thing to do. I do have to ask this question. We all have to ask this question. What if I was working in an all-white credit union in Ohio? Would it be as easy for me as a CEO to commit to a DEI effort? And the answer is maybe not, because I'd have more opposition, possibly. More people would be reluctant to move forward with that charge. But the bottom line, it's the right thing to do. And again, my message is, just because you may work at a credit union, as Jill said, where you think that there's not a lot of diversity in your community, there is diversity in the community. You need to go out and be intentional about finding people and allowing people to have opportunities to have these jobs. I've had some really interesting conversations with people at my workplace. And I just listened to Andre say, you know, he was told he had to work twice as hard. I was talking to a person here who said he was trained by his parents that he has to work twice as hard to get where he wants to go. That's not fair. The same person said, as long as you get in the interview, you know, and you have the qualifications to get in the interview, you're on your own. My question is, what about all these other people that don't get in the interview because of the systemic racism that exists in our society? And, you know, it's going to take a whole lot of work to change that systemic racism, especially in populations that aren't as diverse as where I'm working in currently, Baltimore. But it's something that I encourage and I implore the leaders of these credit unions. You need to do it. And just a couple quick examples of things that you can do. You know, make it part of your strategic plan. Incorporate it into the fabric of your culture. When opportunities exist in your credit union, look for people who can fill those roles who are minorities. You know, I think a lot of times we have this practice of, there's a job opening, there's an opportunity, we need to go post that job on whatever newspaper or wherever you know what, look for people inside your organization that can do the job, that may not have that degree, may not have the perfect experience, but they've got the intellect, they've got the right attitude. You know, look for people like that and give them opportunities. Don't rely on just sending out the job notice that there's a job open. I have a person that I work with here who's the AVP of HR. And what she will do very often is she'll go out in the community and she'll receive great service from Hispanic speaking people in our community. And, you know, she'll be so impressed by the way that she was treated and the service that she received. She'll take her card out and go, if you ever want a change of career, call my number. You know, and what does that do? Well, it gives somebody who might work at McDonald's an opportunity that they may not otherwise have. It also allows our credit union to possibly benefit by getting a bilingual person to join our credit union to help serve a community that needs financial assistance. You know, just simple things that we can do to be intentional, as the word you use, Renee, to make a difference in how our credit unions look and how we impact minority communities. And the last thing I want to say on this is, oftentimes what I've found is that when you do try to create opportunities for minorities and make your workforce more diverse, you as a leader have to inspire confidence sometimes and encourage people to take the leap. Because although a lot of people have parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, you know, their church has told people, you can do it, you can be whatever you want to be. Unfortunately, when you're getting beat down your entire life, sometimes you don't have the confidence in yourself to make that leap. And you need somebody to say, you can do it. You are a leader, you know, you're the right person for this job. And that's, again, you know, white CEOs across the country, managers, recognize that sometimes you have to inspire confidence in people to take the leap and make them believe in themselves, because not everybody does, because of how they've been treated their entire life. But once you do that and you get somebody you hire somebody in a position and you help them and they perform their job well, you've got that person's loyalty. So, you know, again, social responsibility, make a case for that. You can make the business case, but more importantly, you just do what's right and things will work out in the end.
Okay. I got so caught up, I forgot I was supposed to ask a question. Okay. Thank you, Brett.
You're welcome.
Chairman Johnson, I'm going to put you on the spot. You started off as a coin teller in the financial industry, and now you are the chairman of AACUC. Tell us about what the responsibility is for the credit union world with being the chairman of AACUC.
Wow. Thanks, Renee.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, you know, I always talk about the membership. I always talk about the opportunities that are needed. I always talk about the talent that our membership has. I always talk about the education. We have an educated membership. I always talk about the innovation, the creativity, you know, how hard they work. You know, so, you know, I get a chance to interact with our members, not as much as I would want to, but certainly because I've been around so long, I get an opportunity to interact with folks. And so I think it comes down to having that, given that opportunity. And so you mentioned that I was a coin teller. That was my first job. And the crazy part about it, my wife was my girlfriend when I was a coin teller. So she's the only one in this world that remembers that I was a coin teller. And so, you know, as I wind down my career, you know, I'm almost down to the last 5 years of my career. Back then, I was starting out. And so, you know, how did I make it through this maze? And how did I navigate through this maze? And so, you know, you work hard. You put your head down, you work hard. I understood it. I needed to go back to school because I was a non-traditional student. I recognized that I had to get out and volunteer. So meeting people, you never know who you're going to meet and the impact that they will have on your life. I didn't really care about mentors. I wanted to have sponsors. And so when people talk about you when you're not around and they're saying good things and they're saying give that guy an opportunity or give him a chance, he has the potential to do a great job for your organization. So that's the kind of people that I came in contact with. And so it was the power of the network. I was very fortunate as a little kid. So I grew up in the hood. And so the first 10 years of my life, I lived in the Redline that Samira showed in her data. And of course, I didn't know that. But I do remember back in 1968 when the National Guard, we couldn't go out and play because the National Guard was outside of our neighborhoods. I do remember that. But I also remember in 1970 when my mom and my dad, we moved to southwest part of Baltimore City. We're still in the city, but it was all white neighborhood. And so you're talking about a culture shock. That was a culture shock. And so I lived there for 17 years. What I found out was that we put our pants on the same way. We're kids playing. But I can remember the first day playing in the sandbox, playing in the sliding board. And I was 9 years old at the time, almost going on 10. And one of my best friends that I've known since I was 2, he was 12. And we were playing in the sandbox. And the kid came up to us and said, "I can't play with you anymore." And we said, "Why not?" And he said, "Because you're black." My buddy looked at me, I looked at him, and we just kept on playing. We didn't understand that. And so growing up as a teenager, I got my license when I was 16. And I can remember, always getting stopped. And one particular evening, I didn't stop. We were at a red light, a cop was behind me, policeman was behind me. And I said, "You know what? I'm only 2 blocks away from home." I saw the lights glaring, it was dark, and I didn't stop. And so I kept on going. So I parked the car in back of my yard, and the policeman got out and he was yelling and screaming and da 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 da. And my mom came out and they were livid. They were upset. They were saying, "How come? Why is it that why is it that my son always gets stopped? And I have a white kid 2 doors down who doesn't even have a license, that never gets stopped." And oh, by the way, the kid down the street, him and his girlfriend, they were like Bonnie and Clyde because they were robbing people's homes during the day while people were at work. So that's another story. What I found through this journey, you talked about from the coin room to being a CFO. It was a long journey. It has been a long journey. It has been a great, I would consider a great journey. But the kids today, the young folks today, they don't want to be around 30 years before they get that promotion. They don't want to have to work 30 years before they get into the C-suite. I'm the first college graduate in my family. I'm the first one to get a master's. And I teach accounting. I teach an accounting course. But if I'm standing next to a white guy, people assume he's the CFO. And when I go into a class to teach accounting, people look at me like he's going to be teaching us. And so here we are in 2020. So my vision is clear. My vision is clear in 2020, and I'm almost 60 years old, and I'm coming down to the last 5 years of my life. And so I understand there was racism yesterday. There is racism today. There will be some type of racism tomorrow. But I'll be promoting folks that look like me getting that opportunity. And so as the chairman, I know it's a long winding answer, but as chairman, I owe it. I'm successful. I could drop the mic and keep it moving. I bought a home when I was in Baltimore City. The home I live in now, it was built 15 years ago. And so when I hear some of these stories and all, it's like, wow. And so it's very eye-opening for me. And so I could drop the mic and just keep it moving. I got mine, you need to get yours. No, I have a duty, I have a responsibility for the folks that are coming behind me, because as I mentioned before, I stand on the shoulders of those who have come before me. And so the folks that are coming behind me, I owe them a duty to help them be their sponsor, be their advocate, be their influence, hopefully help them into that C-suite or help them into that CEO office, because it's just crazy. I can't understand why it hasn't happened as of yet, and so I don't apologize for that. And so being an African American man, and it's been a black man. I'm black and I'm proud, and I say it loud, and I just I'm very clear. My vision is 2020 on my next 5 years, and what I want to do. I know I'm coming down to the last 45 days of my chairmanship for AHCC, but I am proud and glad to serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Opal, I'm going to put you on the spot. You are a biracial child. I need you to talk about how that affects DEI for you.
Yes, I am biracial, African American. My mom is white. I give my mom a lot of credit because in the 1980s, when I look back, she was brilliant for the things that she did. She understood that from her first marriage, so my two older sisters are white. She understood that my life was going to be very different. So I've always been raised raised to be a Black woman. My mom understood that it would not just be her raising me, that it would be my father's family, and that it would be my neighborhood, which was predominantly Black as well. So race is something that has always been talked about in my family since I was a kid. And my mom, similar to what you said, Renee, is you let anyone mentor you. My mom has let me lead so much, and I'm so grateful to her for that. She never felt distanced or anything because I was living a Black woman's life. She's never felt that. She's extremely proud of me for that. Similarly to Wesley and Adrian, I'm a first generation college graduate, first generation master's degree. I'm from a low income neighborhood. And as you asked Samira why she wanted to work for CUNA, one of the reasons I wanted to work for CUNA Mutual Group is because they've been giving back to my neighborhood, my specific neighborhood that I grew up in for decades. So when I think about that, it gives me such a sense of just pride and connection. And they've been giving for decades. So literally they gave to school supply drives that I got notebooks and backpacks from. And now I'm working for them because I have an education. And it's a thinking about giving back in a way that it's not just a nice thing to do. They are really, when they're giving back right now, it's for future talent to come to our organization. So the DEI thing is all in my history, my story, and everything I try to bring. And same thing, really trying to see what that's going to look like for the next generation, for those next kids that are coming up. And Angela Russell has been mentioned a few times before, but she's another person who is an amazing sponsor. And she has really shown everyone at CUNA Mutual Group, especially in our African American ERG, how to shine light on others, let others step up, and then let them do their thing so then they can do that for the next folks. So I would not be here at all, not even on this call, and don't even know, period, if it weren't for the efforts of DEI and really trying to include folks. I'm not just here as a token at all. My perspective is needed. We're talking about, we're in financial industry. I grew up in poverty. That means everything to me that we're able to have a small piece of changing this world for the better.
John, that's why we had her on the panel. Yeah, that's why. Maria, can you tell everyone what you feel is the most important thing that has happened in your career as it relates to DEI?
Well, you know that I was undocumented for many years before we came, before I got my citizenship. And it was a struggle, but I think what I gained out of that experience is that you have to value everything that you get. And because at the point that when I was undocumented, I had to always be good because I didn't want to be stopped by anybody and be taken back to Mexico. And my mom always told us before we left the house, you got to make sure you do the right thing always. We were almost like scared to do anything bad. So that helped me a lot, develop a good scenario for the rest of my career. I'm very grateful to this country, but I also think that now that a lot of us are leaders, we need to help those that come after us. Renee, you talked about the commitment to change. I know Jill, she was talking about, how the leaders, how as leaders, we need to also help others and also to look around our communities. I think that's very important. See what our communities are doing and bring those people in so that they can help our members. I truly believe that credit unions are the perfect fit for minorities. Sometimes, Renee, we send out invitations to events that we're having, and whether it will be the African American Coalition or the NALCOP or any other organization. And the first thing I think that, we send it to all the CEOs. And the first thing that I think CEOs look at is who around themselves looks like those groups. And instead of them attending, what they do is they look for somebody that looks like that group. If it's the Hispanic or, the African American, they send people that look like them. Instead of them coming to those events and learning more about it so that they can themselves implement the ideas that we put together as networks. I think it's very important that they do that. So I want to leave everybody with that message, because if you get an invitation, whether it be from Renee, from me, or any other organization, don't just look around your area and see who looks like them. Come and join us. Come and learn from us, because I think you'll get a lot that you can put back into your credit unions. Thank you, Renee.
Well, I'm gonna echo that. So you come and you bring the one you wanted to send. How about that?
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wesley, do you have anything that you want to add to this conversation before I turn it back over to John?
Wow, how much time we got left, Renee?
You have 1 minute.
1 minute. All right, that's a lot of pressure right there. If I had to leave everyone who's still on the call with us something, I would say to look around when you leave this call and ask yourself, one, are the people around me diverse? Is my organization diverse? Is my community, the places I frequent? And if it's not, then I would ask yourself the question, what can you do? What can I do to change that? What intentional steps can I make today to create a more diverse atmosphere? And I would say it doesn't matter where you are in life. It doesn't matter what level of you are in the organization. As many folks have already said on this panel, we all can make a difference and we all can change. And it starts with us, right? It starts with me. And so be a proponent in your organizations, be a proponent in your community, be a proponent in the places you frequent, because as Adrian and a couple others said, we have to keep the momentum going. And the only way we're going to keep the momentum going is by continuing the conversation outside of here. We have to take everything we've heard and have those conversations with our families, with our kids, within our communities, the beauty shops, the barber shops, everywhere. And I think we'll definitely see some change. So thank you again. With my 2 seconds left, Renee, definitely appreciate it. And I'm just honored to be a part of this panel. So that's it.
Well, my panelists, thank you so much. Every answer was brilliant and insightful, which is what we know we were going to get. As Brett said, we're not going to be scared. But John, I do have a question for you, and you have 60 seconds to answer as well. And I'm turning it over to you. And that is, you are of Greek origin, and you have experienced some discriminatory practices as well. What do you think has propelled you to be as open and forward-thinking as you are?
Thanks, Renee. I appreciate the comments. I know you and I talked a little bit about this at one point. I think one of the things that I guess for me as a child was my grandparents on both sides of my family were immigrants from Greece, couldn't speak the language. And when we would go into stores, I grew up in a rural town in Indiana, when we would go into stores and shops, Brett mentioned this, but it wasn't that when we walked in that we might have looked different or that people might have looked differently, but the minute that my grandparents would open their mouth, people would laugh, people would walk away, they wouldn't talk to them. My brother and I weren't allowed to speak Greek in school. We were told we weren't allowed to speak it anymore. We were forbidden to do that. So I think it was watching the examples of my grandparents and moving forward and and persevering and having an incredible resolve that was more than others had to have. I think, Wesley, you were told, don't stop, keep moving. I think that's what, because like Adrian, I'm the first person in my family to have a master's degree and those things. So it's hard. I just think that it's an experience that just mine's a very slight experience compared to what all of you have had to endure and continue to. But it was a different experience. And I think watching their example is what made a difference to me.
All right, well, with that, John, I'm turning it over to you. And thank you so much again for allowing us to participate today.
I want to thank all of you. I'd like to thank all of the panelists. I know, Maria, I want to thank you. You were a panelist for us at the association years ago when we started with a Women's Leadership Forum, and you were kind enough to lend your voice to that and your experience, and I appreciate that. Renee, Adrian, thanks for the minute I brought this up to you all, jumping right in the midst of everything else that you have going on, and allowing us to do that. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Andre, who's on here and part of the panel. He said it earlier, but he always makes sure that we keep it real at the association. But his voice, Crystal's voice here at the association, Shannon's voice, it's always important, I think, for that to come through in our communications and the way we do what we do. Renee mentioned 3 CEOs before, or 6 CEOs. I've had the blessing and privilege to serve alongside 3 of those CEOs, Tim, John, Don, and also Bert Hash was here when I first started. Along with the fact that I think in our region, and Adrian can speak to this, and Brett, we're also fortunate to have a good number of Black CEOs, Hispanic females, a cross culture of CEOs in our region in DC. I know Carla Decker is involved with Maria and Club with the celebration that you do at GAC. So thank you all for being here. I also like to thank our leagues. Renee mentioned it earlier. I think leagues are an incredible resource, always have been, and I want to thank this. There's several leagues on this with us today that have also promoted this to their credit unions. So thank you to all of them and to CUNA and our partners with the League CUNA system. One thing for our local credit unions, if I could, is we've created a DEI resource page similar to the page that we had for whether it was COVID, whether it was for folks. So we just started that resource page with DEI, where you'll find information and links to AACUC, to the work that's being done at CUNA Mutual Group, at CUNA, at PSCU, at Feline. So there's a lot of that, the NCUA. So we'll have links to that. So I just want to thank everybody for being there and for being a part of this. So with that, I will leave that with any last thoughts. For those of us locally, we have another webinar on kind of reopening. I mentioned it earlier this Thursday. So we hope to have another, keep this going as a series as we move forward in our efforts with the league. And again, to all the panelists, thank you very much. Brett, thank you for your leadership locally. Adrian, and Renee, again, thank you for your partnership and everything that we've been working on. You guys are doing an outstanding job. Thank you. And I don't think we have any other questions. So I think Mr. Chairman Adrian Johnson, we don't, I thought I would, Renee put you on the spot, so I'll put you on the spot if you and Renee would like to close it. If there's anything else that you'd like, again, these slides will be out there. We'll have contact information with our panelists. So all of the slides will be available that Samira shared as well. So thank you again, everybody.
Yeah, I'll just jump in, John, and just again, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to the association. Thank you again to all the panelists. Thank you, Renee, for your leadership. This has certainly been a open and honest and dialogue within a safe space, and I really appreciate, you know, everywhere I go, every time I hear something, I learn something new. So that's why I always invite Samira, because she has the data. I love it. You know, I'm a numbers guy. What can I say? And so I just want to say thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity. AACUC, check out our website, www.aacuc.org. And as Renee mentioned, We are a nonprofit 501c3. You can donate to our organization. There is a donate button out there on the website. And so certainly this is the right time to do the right things, and we appreciate all your support. So I'll leave it to you for the last words, Renee.
Just everybody have a great day, and make sure that you treat someone with kindness. Be intentional about being kind. And if we can do that, like Maria, we can change the planet.
Thank you again, everybody. Panelists, thank you again. Everyone, enjoy your day, and thanks for your engagement.